Hello, and welcome to Encounters with Polish Literature, brought to you by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. I'm David Goldfarb, and I'll be your host. I'd like to take this and the next episode to think about two of the major writers responsible for challenging the communist system in Poland in the 1960s and 70s, writers who were part of the system immediately after the war until the death of Stalin in 1953, who knew the system from the inside and were positioned to become its strongest critics. And they are Sławomir Mrożek and Tadeusz Konwicki. Our guests this month and next have a lot to say, so I will keep the introductions brief. But before I introduce this episode's guest, I'd like to remind you to subscribe if you like our series, click the bell to receive notifications about new episodes, and follow our playlist down in the description below to catch up on past episodes. You could also leave a comment if you wish. A PhD from the Drama Center at the University of Toronto with an MA in Theater Studies from the Jagiellonian University in Kraków, Tamara Trojanowska has also held an Oxford University scholarship and an internship at the Royal Dramatic Theatre in Stockholm. She has taught at universities in Poland, Canada, and the United States, returning to the University of Toronto as a faculty member in 1998. Since then, she has directed the Polish Language and Literature program in the Slavic department, strengthening its profile and presence in North America, the University College Drama program from 2008 to 2012, and the Center for Drama, Theater, and Performance Studies from 2017 to 2021. She now serves as Vice Dean of Faculty and Academic Life in the Faculty of Arts and Science. Her current research focuses on the intersections of 20th and 21st century drama and theater with history and religious thought, highlighting issues of identity and transgression. Her latest book publication, co-edited with Joanna Nijińska and Przemysław Czapliński, and entitled A History of Polish Literature and Culture, New Perspectives on the 20th and 21st Centuries, was the subject of the first episode of this program, Encounters with Polish Literature, and includes her analysis of transgressive practices in Polish drama and theater. She has also contributed a chapter on this subject to Theater Machine, Tadeusz Kantor in Context, edited by Magda Romańska and Kathleen Choffi in 2020, with her investigations of the dramatic and sacred, resulting in a new selection of and extensive introduction to the plays of Roman Brandstetter, published in 2016, published in Polish. It's been a few years, Tamara, since our first episode of Encounters with Polish Literature. Thanks for joining me again to talk about the work of Sławomir Mrożek.
Well, thank you, David, for inviting me back. Yes, indeed, it's been quite some time and a very successful time for this series. So congratulations on doing this marvelous series for so many people to enjoy, those students and the general public. I'm thrilled to be back.
Thanks so much. It's great to have you. So why don't we start out? Who was Mrożek?
His dislike of speaking was legendary, and he would sometimes sit in the corner when he was young and when he was old without saying a word. He would sometimes answer complicated questions with 2 words or 1 word, and yet all his characters are, completely addicted to talking. So there is the first paradox. But he also is a person, a writer, an artist of absolutely multiple talents. So when you think about it, he wrote plays, 30 or 5 out of, a bit more of them, depending on how you count. He was a prose writer, short stories, feuilletons, essays, 2 novels. He was an extraordinary epistolary artist. We know it now when most of his letters have already been published. And of course, he had wonderful interlocutors, Jan Wojski and Adam Tarn and many others. But when you read those letters, you can clearly appreciate an artist in not only a private person, but also an artist, sharing sometimes in his deepest anxieties about writing. Then he was also a draftsman. So his drawings, again, are legendary, like Mleczko's, right? And were published in Polish, very popular newspapers and weeklies, and he made a name for himself by drawing sketches, satirical sketches, and they are unmistakably Mrożek's. When you see them, like Mleczko's, we will recognize them immediately. And of course, he did put a lot of his ironic humor, if not sarcasm, from time to time into those, little scenes drawn with almost sort of singular line, right? With those little funny, but at the same time pitiful characters. There is one in particular that I so like, and that is, one pitiful character jumping on another pitiful character who's lying down and shouting out loud in this, little bubble, don't you understand that I am suffering? So I'm often thinking about this drawing in particular in the 20s of our 21st century. He was multi-talented. He also was someone who actually worked very hard. There are some wonderful reminiscences from the time when he lived in Krakow, in this famous dom literata, where, all the older writers and young writers and everybody in between right after the war had a place to live and of course, squabble and do all kinds of other things. And it is, again, legendary that he would, sit there writing without talking to anyone, even to his roommate. So, there is another anecdote about, him throwing everything out and putting fire to it. But the thing is that I think it gives us a sense of a complex man, and he was complex on many accounts, because another thing that is very important about him is that Mrożek was born in Bożęcin, near Krakow. Bożęcin, now famous because of Mrożek and also because of the 60th birthday celebrated in Bożęcin with Mrożek, seated on a throne and what's not, this extravaganza that Żukowski...
That was in 1990?
1990, yes. Yeah. So we already have his year of birth, right, by that account. But the thing is, 1930 it is. So the thing is that this is provinces, right? This is Polish provinces. And many critics, and rightfully so, stress that fact. Mrożek himself stresses it in his autobiographical writing. And that is another wonderful genre that we discover Mrożek by, and that is, the diary. Mm-hmm. And of course, Balthazar, that was written as a therapeutic prose to get him out of his post-stroke lack of words. So the provinces is his bedrock, and you can see this throughout many of his works. The fact that he's so intimately familiar with the taste, the texture, the language, the mannerism of provincial Poland. Mrożek, who of course moved with his family very soon after to Krakow, where his father got a job at the post office. And that was very much an upwardly mobile move because he comes from the peasant background. And of course, then leaving Poland for the, big, exciting world. And we are talking, Italy, even though it was a small place, but then it was Paris, and then, Berlin and the States and Mexico, right? So Mrożek coming out of provinces is an important part of Mrożek. And the important part is that there is this impulse to escape. And he talks about it quite a few times, about how important that impulse is to escape. But he was also someone who was very much deeply self-aware and self-ironic. And I actually thought about starting answering your question, who was Mrożek, by quoting Mrożek himself, if you allow me.
Please.
It's his eulogy written by him, and I don't believe ever read. So Mrożek writes, he achieved nothing in life and completed nothing. Everything was sketchy, partial, patched together. Is it because he started so many things almost simultaneously, went in so many directions and tried to be this and that at the same time? Probably. He couldn't choose between literature and life. He was torn between both. He never wanted to be taken for someone well-defined, especially by himself. As a result, his achievements were second-rate in both cases, always rushed and never to the point. He died extremely tired, not because of circumstances that were relatively favorable to him, but because of internal disorder. He was a no man, eternal contrarian. It's a very disturbing way of summarizing one's life. But that part where he is talking about, being torn between, life and writing, when he was torn between many other things as well. So Tadeusz Konwicki, I think, put it really nicely in terms of the forces, contradictory forces that were pulling Mrożek not apart, but stretching him quite far, to the point of his, displeasure with himself. And Konwicki says, it was a conservative avant-gardist, old-fashioned progressivist, serious mocker, grotesque realist, ironist, tinged with quite a sadness. So I think that this list of contradictions gives us a sense of the complexity of the man and the writer, because those you will see in his works as well, right? The particularly in Tango, we will be talking about this, old-fashioned progressivist and conservative avant-gardist and what's not.
I was thinking on this rereading of some of these works that that it really, all the characters on Mrożek, that they're all, they're contradictory characters. They're opposed to each other, but they're all, they all come from the same mind, and they all it's like they're different versions of Mrożek's, mind-body problem. And I think all the works we're going to discuss today, and
absolutely,
they're all inside of him. Yeah.
Absolutely. The mind-body is, dichotomy, I think, is very much at the core of much of what he has written. But it is also, I go back to this province, the sense of rootedness that imprisons and captures us, and uprootedness that at the same time, brings us some freedom, but also quite a lot of anxiety. So there is a sense and another entrapment that we need to talk about with Mrożek, and that is that generationally, right? Born 1930, right. And he said once, I think very, very rightfully so, that he is a child of war, and he said, well, don't make any mistakes. Children of war were not born during the war; they were children during the war. And that experience that, of course, sort of stays hidden or sort of stuck away for quite a long time comes to the fore, for example, in On Foot, right? In his play.
Late work.
Yeah, that's right. It's an amazing play. I was thinking about us talking about it, but again, there are other reasons for us talking about, Tango and Immigrants that we chose to focus on today. So history, that the sense of being a subject of history is another of these big entrapments. And of course, if you think about Love in the Crimea, one of his last plays,
right,
that sense, the need, the yearning to be finally free from history, I think is very strong in that text. Being captured, being locked down or bogged down by history, again, also runs through some of the works that we will be talking, or actually one, particularly the Immigrants, and that we will be talking about today. So the generational part is important also because of the Stalinist episode, right? And it's something that, when you look at it in his long life, Mrożek died in 2013, right? So in his quite a long life, those 3 years, right? One would say, well, why do they matter so many decades after? Well, they do. Mm-hmm. They do matter. They did matter to many of the people who did things that they needed to reckon with later on in life. And so Mrożek, said it himself, and I very much value his honesty, because, he said, being 20 years old, I was ready to accept any ideological proposition without checking it too carefully. The only thing that mattered was that it was revolutionary. Well, we will talk about revolutionary soon. It was from among people like me that they once recruited for the Hitler Youth or the Komsomol. Frustrated, errant, and rebellious youth are present in every generation, but what they do with their rebelliousness depends only on circumstance. And I find that illuminating, because, of course, in that reflection on himself, then he's not excusing himself. He never excused himself, of finding excuses. He took full responsibility for the idiocy of his choices. Some of which, included signing that infamous letter condemning the crap of priests being on trial. There are others, Polish, intellectual luminaries whose signatures are there. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that I want to dwell on, but it's something that is important because it creates, in his reflection on that, Mrożek creates a bridge between what is historical, the circumstances that he mentions here, and the private, right? And the personal. And what is personal really matters. And I think we should never, ever undermine the importance, right, of the personal. Mm-hmm. So particularly in ideological sort of ideology loaded circumstances, but also in situations in which ideological choices are very often dictated by sometimes petty private interests.
I think I think, thinking about, the writers that we're considering in this series, the post-war writers especially, I mean, they're all struggling with this. I mean, it starts, Naukowska, who didn't live long enough to change, she's a leftist before the war, and she was a member of the same after the war. Konwicki went through a communist episode. Szymborska went through an episode where she was part of the revolution, and they all. I mean, that becomes part of the post-war struggle, right? I mean, that they're all later dealing with it. that's the struggle of that generation.
Yes, I fully agree with you, and of course, every generation has its own struggles, and then sort of history looks back and squares the account or not. It depends, but it's also a question of individual conscience, right? When we look at it, sort of in a sense of a cultural ideological landscape, that is one part of it. But then there is another part that I think we should not forget, and that is dealing with that individually in one's conscience.
Right.
But it is also a great, so in a sense, what I want to say is that there is something very Mrożek-like in all of that. And what I mean by that is that the historical and the individual, the model and the actual, the real, are all sort of embedded in what he's saying about, being 20 years old. That there is this sort of a model behavior, right? Everybody did this, or almost everybody did this, and in order to be able to be a part of that scenario, of that script, one needed to do that, not necessarily, with a pistol, like Wajek, running around on the streets and terrorizing everybody, but one way or the other. So Mrożek succumbed. He actually wanted something revolutionary, and so he became a journalist. So he tried his hand and his brain at studying, but then instead became a journalist, and in a moment, landed at Krupnicza in Kraków, in the famous dwellings of Polish writers, and became a member of the union, of the Writers' Union.
Right.
But also, we are talking about an episode. I mean, it was an episode in many ways, right? So, because even already in 1953, he's, publishing his first prose works that are, start to be interpreted as potentially ironic and undermining the system. And then, of course, very, very soon after, with the Thaw of 1956, Mrożek sort of sails into the sort of his own sea, so to speak, right? Into the Mrożek Sea, and that includes his dramatic debut with the play The Police, already a very funny play, and a play in which, of course, he exercises something, or not something, but a particular device that he would be using later on as well. So it's the sort of turning around of the situation. So he imagines a situation and then he turns it around, sort of the topsy-turvy world in which all the initial absurdities on which the initial situation is based are becoming even more pronounced, because of course then they are exacerbated by that turn of events, right? So
by the reversal.
So by the reversal, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then there is exile, right? There is first he leaves Poland at the height of his career, young career, let's put it this way, right? In 1963, and he first goes to Italy, writes Tango, and then leaves for Paris. So he becomes a refugee after signing a letter of protest, or writing a letter of protest against Polish army's intervention in Czechoslovakia in 1968. And we could say the rest is history, but that's not true. Actually, the rest is an absolutely fantastic time in his life when his writing changes, when his life changes. His first wife dies of cancer.
Why don't we talk about Tango? Because Tango was this big, kind of international. That's what made him an international figure. I mean,
yes, very much so.
So what made Tango so different and so internationally resonant, other than the fact that now he was abroad and he could seek translators?
Oh, but David, how many wonderful writers found themselves abroad and never made it?
That's true.
So the fact that he treated immigration as a test for himself, and it transpires clearly from his letters to Błoński in particular, right? That this is where he wants to find out whether he is a writer or not, because looking back at Poland, he, of course, understood that a lot depended on, first and foremost, his familiarity with the material that he was using, his knowledge of the milieu, and so on and so forth. So he wanted to try himself out, and he did. And Tango is, at the same time, sort of wraps up his sort of first phase or first period, right? With the police and one actors and many other works, but at the same time, in my view, also opens a new moment. Not only because it was successful, but also dramaturgically, it opens a new venue for Mrożek. So, what is so amazing about Tango? And I reread both, Tango and Emigrants and his short stories very recently, after not having read them for quite some time. And I must say that my enjoyment of these works was tremendous. So,
me too.
It's just, I thought, I was actually quite skittish, because I thought maybe it's not as fresh as I remember it, from a few years ago. But no, it's actually better. So Mrożek's genius in Tango is that he is setting this play in a family setting, like many other playwrights, using the family setting as, on the one hand, the only remaining milieu where human relationships can be defined easily, right? I mean, these are family relationships. They can be extraordinarily complex and can be horrifically oppressive, and what's not. And we can now list tens of names of major playwrights who did that. But of course, what he does with it is that he now still uses what he was using prior to Tango, and that is he reverses what we normally would expect. So we would normally expect, to have the parents and grandparents, as it is a multi-generational family, and then the son, Arthur, play maybe more traditional roles. That is, if Mrożek wanted to write a play about a revolutionary, well, we all would expect that it would be Arthur, 24-year-old young man who would be the revolutionary, as we have observed throughout the decades, if not centuries. Well,
the father and son scenario.
The father and son scenario. In this case, Mrożek reverses that, but he reverses it in a peculiar way, because it's easy to say, Stomil, Mrożek's father, and Eleanor, his mother, and I will get to the older generation soon. So they are avant-garde artists, from before the war. We would say the classical avant-gardists, who made it their life mission to never ever stop being avant-gardist. Well, it's like a little bit like, hippies who wanted to be hippies way into the 80s when other hippies already became yuppies, right? So Stamil and Eleanor decide that no, we want to stay because this is their mission. They fought very hard against all rules, and be it social, moral, whatever. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Most possibly most importantly for Stamil, artistic. Well, Stamil presents one of his experiments, and of course, it's nothing. It's quite an outrageously old-fashioned thing that he presents. It's Adam and Eve in paradise, and there is there are some sound effects.
One of
that
various
scare
weddings
everybody.
that happens in the work.
That's right, and that's exactly it. If not the first one, in the book of Genesis. But of course, it's completely beside the point that Stamil's theater within theater, almost straight from Hamlet, is completely ineffective in a sense that it's not an experiment because it gives an idea to Arthur, his final idea as to how to create the world anew. So Arthur is Arthur is presented as stiff and conservative. But Arthur wants to be conservative only to rebel against something that he will recreate, right? He clearly says that. So he's not a conservative who wants to recreate and then stick to it. He wants the world to fall into some kind of a form. Everything in Tango is basically a mess on the stage, very skillfully arranged. But Arthur wants to recreate that form for the world, bring it back into some kind of order, only to be able to rebel against it as his age, as he says in the play, as his age demands. He's saying, all my friends at the university are laughing at me, right? Because I have nothing to rebel against. So this is how the play develops. And I mean, this is the situation. And of course, there is also a grandma and an uncle who sort of gave into this formlessness. And there is one character who sort of is there, but we may not pay too much attention to him at the beginning, and that is Edek. Well, Edek, who is an embodiment of brute force. The whole play now revolves around the possibility of giving the world, the reality, some kind of new order. Now, how can you order reality? So Arthur's first idea is, of course, to order it by going back to old forms, right? To customs, to behaviors. So hence he is thinking that this Adam and Eve thing might not have been completely off the mark, because getting married could bring that world into order. Right. And so he meets his cousin Ala, who was sort of hiding somewhere in the living room, and
under
proposes,
the table or something like that.
Oh, she's like wrapped in draperies that are scattered on the stage, right?
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
So Ala sort of appears like almost like Venus, from the waves, and immediately catches Arthur's attention, because of course deep down Arthur is just devoured by his desires that he doesn't want to admit he has, and that's one of his problems. So he tries to convince Ala that marrying him will recreate this world of order, that it will bring back something against which his generation would be able to finally rebel. Otherwise, it all sort of melts. The world to him melts into nondescript or non-defined mass of things and relationships. Well, Anna finally agrees to do that, to marry him. And here comes another turn that sets a different set of events in motion. Arthur goes out. Arthur goes out and comes back drunk. Well, one would say, well, of course. You see, so Mrożek uses these things that the audience can expect may be there in a play about, a bourgeois salon and, of the whatever time. And then, of course, here's the young man who is going to get married. So he's going out and having some fun.
Getting drunk right before his wedding.
Getting drunk, yeah, well, it's, a stag party. But nothing doing. I mean, that's not what he's doing there. He comes back, and when the whole family is now dressed properly, moths are eating at them because, of course, all of this attire comes from the attic, and it's a very funny play in that sense, right? And the uncle Eugene is now the main guard of that new old order, and Arthur comes back fully aware that looking at all of them, looking like mummified remnants of the past, and he of course understands that his idea of bringing it back through a recreation or revival of the old forms is completely idiotic. That world that he had created is as out of place and out of shape as the one that he wanted to redo. Long story short, Arthur wants and needs a different idea that would organize his world. And there he gets that idea when his wonderful grandma, at the beginning, sort of running around in her sneakers and playing poker with Eddie, and comes back and says that she is dying, and she lies on the catafalque, a very important piece of the set design that is central in that play.
There's one in Witkatz's mother too, right?
Of course, yes, indeed.
This is a bit of a theme.
There is a lot of Witkatzy, yes. There is a lot of Witkatzy in Mrożek, as there is quite a bit of Gombrowicz in him as well.
Sure.
But so that's right. So she lies down and dies as a matter of fact. Well, that gives Arthur an idea of the power of power and the power of death. That the ultimate power that he wants for himself to recreate the world is, in fact, brute force. So, not surprisingly, he makes Eddie his right hand, but he is undone. And what undoes Arthur is the fact that Alla, his cousin, to whom he thought he would be getting married, stops him in his tracks before he kills anyone, and he was ready to do that.
Right.
And tells him that she slept with Eddie. Well, she's not the only one in the family who slept with Eddie. His mother also did that. And of course, he wanted to create a wonderful tragedy scenario by inciting his father to kill Eddie. But in this time around, so Arthur breaks down and looks for the revolver to kill Eddie, who is simply stronger and quicker, and kills Arthur instead. The play ends in a very loaded scene when Eddie terrorizes the whole family. He puts Arthur's jacket on. Of course, it's too small. Arthur, being a lofty intellectual, he studies philosophy and medicine. Interesting combination in itself. And Eddie is a boor, well equipped, and he invites Uncle Eugene into a tango. And indeed, the play ends with what the title says it should, and that is tango. It's la comparsita of all tangos, for a reason. It indeed was, and as we know, it's a what, 1916, 1917 when it was composed, but it's one of the most. It's an Uruguay. Yeah, it's an Uruguayan musician, but it became the most popular tango of tangos, and of course, it takes us back to the very beginnings of the tango, in habaneras and the poorest of the poor dancing it to the dismay of upper classes. So and then of course Stomil also mentions the tango as how much courage did it require to dance the tango, and it is only when this piece of music sort of really undoes the corseted bourgeois or petit bourgeois or bourgeois world. Now, in this last scene of tango, the same dance is not undoing the bourgeois world. It actually marries the old bourgeoisie, in Uncle Eugene, and the new brute force of someone as uncomplicated as Eddie, who will reign. Now, it is very often the case that, as speaking of tango, of course, I do give a short synopsis. Well, it's not that short, but still, in trying to also elaborate on what that means, rather than just interpreting it without giving the viewers some sense of what the play is all about. But the core of the play is that this reversal of sort of liberal, artistic, free, unlimited, unbound artists, and the stiff conservative Arthur is not as clear as we sometimes want it to be, because in many ways it's not Arthur who gives birth to Eddie. It is Stomil who gives birth to Eddie. It is Stomil's generation that breeds Eddie into existence.
The middle
and
generation.
Leonor, it's not only generation, but it's also in terms of their complete unawareness of what Eddie brings with him. It's this complete laissez-faire, their unbounded enthusiasm for his authenticity, for his for the way he is, and so on and so forth. So the fact that Eddie reigns the world in tango is more complicated than some critics wanted it to be, saying, if now we look at all these conservative movements, the fascism is brewing around the corner. I'm sorry to say, but that's not what Mrożek is doing. Absolutely, Arthur is a lunatic, and he becomes a lunatic, a dangerous lunatic, and he would have become a dangerous lunatic if he were not killed. But the person who kills him is a monster child of the very wonderfully free and liberal generation of permanent artists, children artists, completely responsible and what's not. So it complicates that picture. I want to complicate that picture. Partly because of what we were talking about at the beginning, Mrożek being a conservative avant-gardist and old-fashioned progressivist. So the signs, plus and minus, are not just thrown there in an obvious way. And every staging can do with this play quite a bit. And I would suggest also that it's a very relevant play to the world we live in now.
But I'm thinking about Mrożek, to call him the conservative avant-gardist. I mean, he's like, he's very kind of strict about his sense of form and structure. I mean, we think of, contemporary Polish theater is very much director driven, very, coming out of Grotowski, coming out of, Exercise and so forth. But Mrożek is very text oriented. I mean, he has detailed, stage directions everywhere. And he's putting in these, sort of formal cues. I mean, the avant-garde experiment at the beginning with the gun is, this is Chekhov's gun that's, that if it appears in the first act, it has to go off in the second act. And, and then the allusion to Hamlet, which comes back when is it Stomil who says words, words, words at the end. And then, now like, the Hamlet plot is the new gun, I think, in the play. That it's like if you put the Hamlet plot in the first act, it's there's going to be patricide by the end, and maybe there'll be something else. And then having set off these or set these structures in motion, then he can do the reversal. I think. I mean that's
yes.
He relies on
still
that.
Yes, I fully agree, David, but it's still a very surprising reversal. And I think going back to your question, what was so interesting about, or what is still interesting about this play is that it does the unexpected. The play could have developed differently, and we can clearly see it, towards the end of the second act. And that reversal at the end, that with those famous monologues, Arthur's monologues, in which, by the way, that dichotomy, or the dichotomy that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation between body and mind, are coming to the fore. If we had a moment, we could read that part where he looks at them and tells them that they are scum, and they are scum because they are physical.
Arthur, don't you see the logical conclusion? Creatures of flesh caught up in your glandular secretions and terrified at the thought of your death. Are you incapable of all understanding? But I understand. Unthinking cattle, behold your Redeemer. I have risen above this world, and I will draw you all up after me, because I alone have a brain freed from the snares of the bowels. Eugene, instead of insulting us, my dear great-nephew, kindly express yourself more clearly. Arthur, won't you ever understand, you whose lives rot away like mushrooms? You're like blind puppies that would walk in circles forever if they had no master to lead them. Without form or ideas, you would crumble to chaos and be consumed by the void if I weren't on hand to save you. Do you know what I'm going to do with you? I'm going to create a system in which rebellion will be combined with order, non-being with being. I will transcend all contradictions. Eugene, it would perhaps be better if you just leave the room.
Right. And there are many, many cues throughout the play, even with Ala, when he tries to contain his desire for her, and yet, uses her. That's another very interesting part in the play, where he wants to use her. And Ala, of course, undoes him. Ala sees through him and wants to get a spark of emotion, of connection from him. In her famous scene, one of my favorite scenes in Tango, when she talks to Eleanor, and before the wedding, and ask Eleanor whether she's happy. And of course, Eleanor cannot answer that question in any positive way. It's all as formal, in a sense that that freedom with Stomil, all the experimental formlessness that they try to live by, is as stifling in many ways as an old form.
Allah, Sits down at the mirror. The bells are still ringing. Why do you all despise each other? Eleanor. I don't know. Maybe because we have no reason to respect each other. Alla. Yourselves or each other? Eleanor. It comes to the same thing. Shall I fix your hair? Alla. It's got to be done all over again. She takes off her veil. Eleanor combs her hair. Alla continues. Are you happy, mother? Eleanor. I beg your pardon? Alla. I asked if you were happy. What's so funny about that? Eleanor. It's a very indiscreet question. Alla. Why? Is it a disgrace to be happy? No, I wouldn't say that. Alla. Then you're not very happy, are you? Because you're ashamed. People are always ashamed about not being happy. It's like having pimples or not doing your homework. It makes them feel guilty, almost criminal. Eleanor. It is the right and duty of all to be happy, now that the new era has set us free. Stomil taught me that.
And Alla tells Eleanor that she has something up her sleeve if Arthur, doesn't come around and doesn't marry her for reasons other than his ideas. And so she does. It's a very interesting piece in that play, where that dichotomy between mind and body is not only addressed by a female character that is actually sort of secondary in importance, really used as an instrument in the play, but also in many ways, of course, becomes quintessential at the end when she, tells Arthur that she betrayed him with Edek. Edek, the epitome of the body, the epitome of nature, right? So, of course, that's why Arthur rages at the beginning and wants to kill Eddie. Not only because, he is envious, jealous, rather. It's not jealousy that speaks through Arthur. It's just the impossibility of digesting the fact that there had been this intimate physical contact with this embodied an element, nature itself, right? Brainless nature.
Right.
So yeah.
I know you want to touch on the Emigrants. So
very much so.
Daniel Gerald, in his introduction to the Mrożek Reader, describes the Emigrants as the first play that seems to be about real people. That maybe that's not entirely true, but to some degree we can see it's more naturalistic in some way. The dialogue is maybe a little more naturalistic, less maybe a little less contrived, and yet it's like kind of a Godot scenario.
Yes,
right?
It is very much so.
So I don't know if it's more naturalistic or not. But what's your take on the play?
He's still using two antagonists, two characters who are opposites, who again in many ways are nature and culture and nature, an intellectual, someone who wants to write a book, and then an XX who is a worker. But he's this sort of peasant turned worker. And there are many of those peasant turned workers. In many ways, they are two opposites that could be read as one character. I can't remember. It might have been Nietzsche who imagined the Emigrants as a monologue, sort of written in two voices. But I'm not very much convinced about that, because in many ways these two characters bring to this play a tremendous load. So one, of course, is the class load, right? So the class load that very often, I believe, we disregarded. We often disregarded in Polish culture and literature, even though it is so pronounced, right? I mean, not only in literature, you think about Wyspiański and many others, but in this, and also in contemporary or current scholarship, right? Sort of bringing back some of the classes that were not as much a subject of of cultural reflection. But in this case, the strength, the power with which Mrożek undoes the intellectual, in which he not only demystifies, but in which he truly unveils the usurpations of the mind, but also class usurpations, is very powerful. AA is a pitiful character in many ways. When you read it now and you see how he talks with XX, without, there are only a few moments in the play where he sort of levels with him, right? How he takes advantage of his very limited intellectual abilities. XX is truly simple. He cannot, for example, always make sense of what is the cause and what is the effect. He very often confuses the two. He is, in many ways, someone who sees his value in work and money. Because work without money, that's not what he values. He values money, but he's willing to lose his health and lose everything, lose his family and everything else in order to accumulate things that he can buy with this money.
XX. Because I hate poverty. I like having things. When I hold something in my hands, then I have it. And when I let it drop, well, then I haven't got it no more, right? AA. That's right. XX. I work my ass off, but I get paid for it. And when I've gotten paid, I'll be rich, so it pays off, right? AA. It makes sense. XX. Only sometimes I wonder, what's the use of it all? AA. All what? XX. Well, all I've got. I can't take it with me when I die. They won't let me get into paradise with it, and there's nothing I can do with it in hell. So why do I slave like this? AA. It's you who wants it that way. XX. Sure. But what do I get out of it? I'm ruining my health, and I don't have any pleasures. I don't drink. I don't smoke, except when you offer me one. AA offers him a package of cigarettes. Go ahead. Help yourself, please. XX. God bless you. He takes a cigarette, but then throws it back on the table. Tell me, what's the use, eh? Why? AA. What about your children? You're going to build a house. You can leave that to your children when your time is up. XX. And they, who are they going to leave it to? AA. Their children. XX. Ah. And how's it going to end? AA. It doesn't end. Why do you want it to end? XX. Just like that, eh? It doesn't end. You mean it'll never end? AA. That's right. Never. XX. So you say there's no end. But how can that be, seeing there was a beginning? AA. You're asking some pretty difficult questions. Schopenhauer already wrestled with them.
In many ways, of course, he strikes us as someone for whom we do feel certain pity, and yet he's also dangerous in his limitations, in his stupidity, in all his little vices. Let's put it this way, a pitiful character. But I don't know why, but it is AA that really rubs me the wrong way, not XX. And possibly because AA, it is so easy for AA to take advantage, intellectual advantage, discursive advantage. This is what I mean, discursive advantage of XX. And he does so all the time in tiresome explosions of his intellectual prowess. And those are wonderfully ironic, sarcastic pieces that I think are still very much worth reading and hearing for many reasons. I don't think that this conflict has been put to bed or has disappeared. So the XX's gesture, the final gesture, almost final, right? Except for his snoring at the end, of tearing up his hard earned money in reaction to AA's incitement, when AA, calls him a slave, a perfect material for his book that, of course, he would never write. Yeah. And XX tells him that.
Yeah, XX, I love this line. Like XX says, you spend too much time lying on your divan. And then AA says, at the moment, I'm organizing my thoughts. I'm studying. I'm weighing the pros and cons, and maybe we all see ourselves in that, like spending too much time before we publish something, just, not being sure, right? Not being sure of oneself and putting it off. And that's XX's brilliance. I mean, it's absolutely transparent to him. He doesn't need to be an intellectual to see that.
That's exactly it. Because, of course, I mean, he says many other things about AA that are absolutely true to the core. He picks up on his loneliness. He picks up on his alienation from people. He picks up on and talks about it clearly. He clearly tells him, "You will never write this book." But when and he does have his own sense of honor, right? I mean, he would eat dog's food only when AA convinces him that it's cat's food rather than dog's food, because he is not a dog. I mean, he can be a cat, but he cannot be a dog. I mean, there are many places in that play where XX reacts to AA's attacks.
XX. I don't want to drink with you. AA. Careful, I represent the state, the government, the regime, political power. XX. It's not because of that. AA. But why then? XX. But you said you were a bastard. AA. Exactly. So what? XX. Well, that's all. It's because of that. AA. You mean you don't want to drink with a bastard? XX. Oh, why shouldn't I? Of course I can drink with a bastard. That's not the point. It's because you said we're among ourselves here. That means that I too am a bastard. AA. So then you don't consider yourself a bastard? XX. No. AA. Which means you think you're better than I. XX. That's not true. It's just that I don't see why I should be a bastard. What have I done for you to treat me like that? Tell me, why do you treat me like a bastard? If you don't know why, you should shut up instead of insulting me. One doesn't go around insulting people without a reason. AA. All right, let's say I exaggerated a little. XX. In that case, it's different. That means we're not among ourselves here. AA. Let's say not quite. XX. But that changes everything. I can drink with you now.
This is like a psychomachia, right? I mean, they attack each other, and sort of the tables are turned, in swift moments. But they are being turned around throughout the whole play. In many stagings abroad, the immigrants were read quite differently from how they are read or were read or have been read in the Polish theater, or even in Eastern European setup, and that was that both this class distinction was not as pronounced. The audience didn't see them as so distinctly brain and body and instinct. I mean, all those fantasies of XX, of having sex with a fine lady in the washroom. I mean, it's so base, right? It's so base. I mean, he's base. He doesn't take care of himself, but he polishes his shoes, his Sunday shoes, because that's what one does with Sunday best, right? So there are those little things that somehow make us identify these two characters with their original setting, so to speak, even though it's not specified. There is also a great part in that play about how it is set. They are in the basement. They are and actually AA talks about it quite a great deal. They, feeling as if you were in the bowels of this other world. Mm-hmm. So this whole issue of East and West, for the Polish audience, no longer relevant, but the play makes the distinction between us and them very relevant to many other audiences, I believe. And then that sacrifice of one's life, and I'm putting sacrifice in quotation marks, for the money and for the betterment of life elsewhere, is, of course, I think many hundreds and thousands of immigrants around the world can easily identify with that.
Yes.
Not necessarily with the baseness of XX, but with that dream of building something better elsewhere, not here. The sense of complete alienation from the world where they are, and not a bridge built with it. Even though, XX has no desire for obvious reasons, he doesn't see them as people. People are back home. Well, but AA doesn't make any attempts to do that either. So, what kinds of anxieties are sitting deep down in AA that he, under the pretext of studying a perfect slave, he is stuck with XX in his aura of superiority, and doesn't go and measure himself elsewhere, where he would actually possibly meet partners who could probably put him in his place quite soon. So
they're circumscribed within this basement.
They are circumscribed in this basement. The limitation of that experience makes their conversation so much more potent. Again, entrapment in which people fantasize about freedom. And Mrożek is one of the best Polish writers to turn that concept, or keeping turning that concept of freedom around in almost every single of his works. What does it mean? And sort of ripping off the pretenses that we concoct and dress that concept in order to fit our desires or our imaginary yearnings.
Thanks so much for joining me again on the program.
Thank you, David.
To see you again.
Very good to see you too. Bye-bye.
Hold up. Please subscribe and click the bell to stay on top of the program. Watch the credits for some recommendations about how you can support aid for Ukraine and for Ukrainians fleeing the war in their country. I'd like to thank all the people who helped make this series possible. The Polish Cultural Institute New York sponsors our program. Bartek Remisko, head of Humanities and Literature at the Polish Cultural Institute New York, is our executive producer. Natalia Iudin is my fellow producer and editor. Our opening and closing music is by Radek Przedpełski. Thank you all for listening and reading along with us. Let's meet again in a month, when we'll pick up our discussion of the 1970s by looking at some of the works of Tadeusz Konwicki. See you then.
To szary dzień, jak zawsze w tej okolicy. Cała sceneria wydaje się chwilami fotografią z ilustrowanej gazety. Tak szare, tak płaskie są domy, ludzie i pojazdy.